Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss the new stories we share. Let's begin. The little girl couldn't have been more than 5 years old. She walked straight toward me like she knew exactly who I was, like she'd been waiting her whole short life for this moment. I was standing in the lobby of my own building. 47 floors of glass and steel bearing my name. Security guards flanking the entrance. Assistants checking their tablets. The usual chaos of a Tuesday morning in Manhattan. And this child in a pink dress with a crooked bow in her hair cut through all of it like none of it mattered. Her father was chasing behind her. "Sophie, wait! Sophie, you can't just—" But Sophie wasn't listening. She stopped right in front of me, looked up with these enormous brown eyes, and held out a folded piece of paper. "This is for you," she said. Her voice was soft but certain. My assistant stepped forward. "Sir, we have the board meeting in." I raised my hand. Something about this child made everything else fade into background noise. "What's this?" I asked, crouching down to her level. "A picture," she said. "Daddy said you're an angel, so I drew you with wings." I felt something crack in my chest, a hairline fracture in the armor I'd spent decades building. Me, an angel. I was Marcus Thorne, net worth $11 billion, cover of Fortune magazine 3 times, known for hostile takeovers, surgical efficiency, and a negotiating style that left grown men sweating through their shirts. Nobody had ever called me an angel. I unfolded the paper, and that's when my hands started shaking. The drawing was simple. Crayon, a stick figure with yellow wings, another stick figure lying on the ground, red scribbles near the second figure's chest, and words written in a child's wobbly handwriting. "The angel saved my daddy." I stared at it. My throat went dry. "I don't understand," I whispered, but somewhere deep in my memory something was stirring. Something I'd buried so long ago I'd convinced myself it never happened. The father finally caught up. He was breathing hard. Mid-30s maybe, working-class clothes, calloused hands, a scar running along his jawline. He looked at me with tears already forming in his eyes. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "you don't remember me. I know you don't. But I remember you. I remember everything." I stood up slowly. My knees felt weak. My heart was pounding in a way it hadn't since I was a young man with nothing but fear and hunger driving me. "Forward, who are you?" I asked. He took a breath, steadied himself. "My name is Daniel Reyes. 14 years ago, you saved my life. You didn't know it. You probably didn't even think about it again. But you saved me, and I've been trying to find you ever since." The lobby fell silent. Even my assistant stopped moving. I looked down at the drawing again, the red scribbles near the figure's chest. Suddenly, I wasn't in my building anymore. I was 23 years old again. Broke, desperate, living in a one-room apartment in the Bronx with a mattress on the floor and a hot plate that barely worked. I wasn't Marcus Thorne the billionaire back then. I was just Marcus, a nobody, a kid who'd aged out of foster care with nothing but a GED and enough rage to burn the whole world down. That night, I'd been walking home from my third job, dishwasher at a diner. My hands were cracked and bleeding from the industrial soap. My back ached. I hadn't eaten since morning. I was cutting through an alley when I heard it, a muffled cry, then a thud. Then silence. I should have kept walking. That's what you did in neighborhoods like that. You minded your own business. You survived, but something made me stop. Maybe it was the memory of all the times I'd been the one on the ground, waiting for someone to help, waiting for someone to care. Nobody ever came for me, so I turned around. There was a man lying in the alley, mid-20s, blood pooling under him, 2 guys standing over him going through his pockets. I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed a metal pipe from a dumpster and charged. I screamed like something wild, like something that had been caged too long and finally broke free. The 2 guys ran, cowards. They disappeared into the night. I dropped to my knees beside the bleeding man. Hey, stay with me." His eyes were glassy, his breathing shallow. The wound was in his side. Just below his ribs, I pressed my hands against it, felt the warm blood seeping through my fingers. "Help!" I shouted into the darkness. "Somebody call 911. A light flickered on in a window above. An old woman's face appeared. "Please," I begged. "Call an ambulance." The window closed. I didn't know if she'd do it. "You're gonna be okay," I told the man. I didn't know if I believed it. "Just stay with me. Keep your eyes open." He grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. "My wife," he whispered. "She's pregnant. Tell her. Tell her I love her." My eyes burned. "You're gonna tell her yourself," I said. "Don't you dare give up." The ambulance came. Paramedics pushed me aside. They loaded him onto a stretcher and disappeared into the night, sirens wailing. I stood there in that alley covered in a stranger's blood, watching the red lights fade. I never knew his name, never knew if he survived. I went home, washed the blood from my hands, and tried to sleep. By morning, I'd convinced myself to forget it ever happened. That was me. Daniel's voice pulled me back to the present. I stared at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the tears streaming down his face. That was you in the alley, he nodded slowly. I spent 6 weeks in the hospital, 3 surgeries. The doctors said if someone hadn't applied pressure to the wound, if they hadn't kept me conscious until the ambulance arrived, I would have bled out in minutes. My legs felt like water. I reached for the marble counter beside me, steadying myself. I didn't know, I said. I never found out what happened to you. You saved my life, Daniel said, and then you vanished. I spent years looking for you, but I didn't know your name, didn't know anything about you, just a young guy in a gray jacket with blood on his hands telling me not to give up. I remembered that jacket, thrift store, $2. I'd thrown it away after that night because the bloodstains wouldn't come out. The woman in the window, I said quietly. She made the call? She did, Mrs. Patterson. She passed away a few years ago, but she remembered you too, she told me, about the young man who ran toward danger when everyone else would have run away. Sophie tugged at her father's sleeve. Daddy, is this the angel? Daniel knelt down beside her. Yes, baby, this is him. This is the man who saved Daddy so you could be born. My breath caught so you could be born. This child. This beautiful, innocent child with her crooked bow and her crayon drawings. She existed because of a choice I made in a dark alley when I had nothing, when I was nobody. I looked at her drawing again, the angel with the yellow wings. I'd spent 20 years becoming rich, building an empire, crushing competitors, making my name mean something, but I'd forgotten what it felt like to mean something to someone. How did you find me? I asked. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn newspaper clipping. The edges were soft from being handled too many times. It was an article from 5 years ago, a profile piece, my face on the cover of a business magazine. I was in a waiting room, Daniel said. Dentist's office, saw this magazine, saw your face, and I just knew something in my gut, the shape of your jaw, the way you hold yourself. I knew it was you. I invited them to my office. My assistant tried to protest about the board meeting, but I just looked at her and said, cancel everything. She stared at me like I'd grown a second head. In 20 years, I'd never canceled a board meeting. Not for illness, not for emergencies, not for anything, but this was different. We rode the elevator in silence. Sophie held her father's hand and looked at me with those trusting eyes. In my office, I poured Daniel a glass of water, gave Sophie some paper and more crayons from my desk drawer. What happened after that night? I asked. After you recovered. Daniel sat back in the leather chair. He looked around at the mahogany walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the art that cost more than his house probably did. Took me a while to get back on my feet, he said. Physically and financially, medical bills nearly destroyed us. But my wife, Maria, she never gave up. Neither did I. I went back to school, got a trade, became an electrician, nothing fancy but honest work. He paused. And then Sophie came along, our miracle baby. The doctors said Maria might not be able to have children after all the stress. But 5 years ago, there she was, perfect and healthy. Sophie was drawing another picture. This one had 3 people, a family. I named her after my grandmother, Daniel continued. But every year on her birthday, I tell her the story of the angel who saved Daddy. I never wanted her to forget that kindness exists in this world, that strangers can be heroes. My eyes burned. I turned toward the window, looking out at the city skyline. I'd made my fortune in real estate, buying properties, developing them, selling them for astronomical profits. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped seeing people. They became numbers, tenants, assets, liabilities. I'd evicted families, demolished communities, made decisions that put profit above everything else. I told myself it was just business. I told myself I had to be ruthless to survive. But standing here now, looking at this man and his daughter, I realized how much I'd lost. I'm not an angel, I said quietly. I'm not even close. Daniel stood up and walked over to me. Maybe not, he said, but 20 years ago in that alley you were, and that's enough. I turned to face him. It shouldn't be, I said. That version of me, he wouldn't recognize who I've become. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's why we're here, he said. That night I went home to my empty penthouse, 14,000 square feet, a view of the entire city, and not a single person waiting for me. I sat in the darkness and looked at Sophie's drawing, the angel with the yellow wings. I'd spent my whole life running from the scared, hungry kid I used to be. I thought if I built enough walls, made enough money, accumulated enough power, I could outrun him forever. But he was still there, still waiting, still hoping someone would tell him he mattered. Daniel's words echoed in my mind. Maybe that's why we're here. Over the next few months, I changed, slowly at first, then all at once. I started a foundation in Sophie's name, funded scholarships for foster kids aging out of the system, built affordable housing in the neighborhoods I'd once gutted for profit. I visited Daniel's family for dinner, met Maria, who cried when she hugged me, ate homemade food at a kitchen table that was more crowded and more full of love than any restaurant I'd ever dined in. Sophie showed me all her drawings, every single one, and I hung them on my office wall right next to my Forbes covers. People thought I'd lost my mind. My board members whispered. My competitors circled like sharks, but I didn't care anymore because I finally understood something I'd forgotten a long time ago. The money, the power, the empire. None of it meant anything without connection, without purpose, without people who saw you as more than a name on a building. Daniel saved me just as much as I'd saved him, maybe more. He reminded me who I was before the world convinced me I had to become someone else. A year later, I stood at Sophie's 6th birthday party. Balloons everywhere, kids running and laughing, cake smeared on faces. Daniel handed me a piece of paper. "Sophie made this for you," he said. I unfolded it, another drawing, but this time there were two angels, one big, one small, holding hands. Underneath, in that same wobbly handwriting, me and my angel friend Marcus. I didn't cry in front of people, never had, never would. But that day in the middle of a backyard in Queens, surrounded by the chaos of a child's birthday party, I let the tears fall. Because sometimes the smallest moments carry the biggest truths, and sometimes the people we save end up saving us. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and visit the channel for more real-life stories.